someone or something, or the society, church, everyone at that, for that matter, said that gay people can't be a part of the body of Christ. And thank God for Troy Perry. He didn't quite say it the way I would say it. But he said, that's a lie. And we stand here today as a testament to his accepting the call. Will you pray with me? Thank you, O God, for this day. Thank you for your presence with us. Thank you for this worship celebration and everything that we have seen and heard and experienced so far. And now that we go to this preaching moment, we ask, O God, that you reveal yourself all the more, that you take root in our hearts and in our minds, that we may be transformed by your very presence, and be a transforming presence out in the world. Amen. When I was a child, and we read the biblical stories, especially the ones in which God spoke to people, without fail, I would ask my father or my mother and say, why doesn't God talk to us anymore? And they would answer correctly, but back then I thought it was a dodge. Especially my father would say, God does speak to you. You're just not listening. But I had in my mind, I want to hear the voice. DeWayne, do this, don't do this. I want to hear it. But as I got older, I realized that he may have been telling me the truth in the best way he knew how. And then it occurred to me that yes, God is speaking. But it's more than likely that we are just telling God no. Or we are indeed saying, I don't want to hear what you have to say, God. So the question we have to wrestle with is, have you ever said no to God? It's a rhetorical question. Because I tell you, I believe that most of us have said no to a request from God without even knowing that we did. Or that without even knowing that God even asked us to do anything. But here's the thing too. I believe that God is always asking us to do things. I believe God is always beckoning us and prodding us to do any number of tasks and callings and responsibilities. And guess what? We say no. No. And I don't think we say no because we don't want to be obedient to a divine call. On the contrary, I think most of us say no to God because we aren't even aware that God is trying to get our attention. And here we go. We don't believe that God will call us in the first place. And the reason we don't believe because, and yes, I'm about to go off on the church, we don't believe that God would call us because too many of us believe, because the church have told us this over and over again, that we are not good enough, that we are not gifted enough, and that we are not righteous enough. Therefore, God isn't interested in you. That's what they tell us over and over again. I told you about Reverend Elder Troy Perry, the founder of Metropolitan Community Churches. He said no to God's call to be a pastor because he thought that when they stripped him of his clergy credentials, when they found out he was gay, then, well, obviously, gay people can't be pastors. He assumed that because humans determined that he was not worthy to be a pastor and preacher because of his sexuality, that he was no longer useful to God, who called him in the first place. And because he didn't think that he was good enough or gifted enough or righteous enough to be the one that God called, he hit rock bottom in despair. Rock bottom. Suicidal. And it was in that moment that he encountered God. And God told him to plant a church that would be a ministry to God's LGBTQ people. And after he paid a little bit more attention, Troy Perry's no turned into a yes, and MCC was born. Now, the journey in the vocation to which God called him was not easy. It hasn't been easy. There has been struggle. We have lost wonderful people to AIDS and anti-gay violence. We continue to embrace a ministry that people say just doesn't make sense in this type of environment. But Troy Perry said yes. And because he said yes to God's call to be an agent of deliverance, people have been delivered and liberated to be who they are, to see themselves as God's beloved. Some of you sit right here now because he accepted the call. You sit here now believing in your ministry because he accepted the call. Moses said no. I can't believe Moses. But anyway, Moses said no. After he'd finally paid attention and departed from his path to get a closer look at what looked like a flame of fire in a bush, the whole course of his life would change. God reveals to Moses that God has not forgotten nor forsaken Israel. God sees their misery. God hears their cries. God knows their suffering. God reveals that God is going to come down and deliver God's children and bring Israel out of slavery in Egypt to a spacious and bountiful land. And then God, here's the kicker, God tells Moses, "Come, Moses. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring God's people out of Egypt." That's right. I'm calling you to do it. I'm sending you, Moses. And Moses says, no. I don't want to do it. That's pretty much what he said. Moses told God, no, you're not getting me. God is speaking to Moses and says, I'm sending you. And Moses said, I don't want to do it. And I understand, it's dangerous. It's dangerous to confront the most powerful leader in the most powerful nation in the land, to demand that he free the enslaved. But then God assures Moses that God will be the mighty hand by which Moses can compel the Pharaoh to let God's people go. God reveals God's name that people might know who sent Moses in the first place. And Moses says no. Moses didn't want the job. And even after God demonstrates God's supernatural power, he turns Moses' staff into a snake. He even strikes Moses with a skin disease. We think leprosy, and then heals him right away. All of this just to show you what kind of power is backing Moses up. And Moses then, here's Moses' response. God, I am not eloquent or charismatic. I'm dumb. This is his response. In other words, no. And the first question was, well, why would God pick someone who can't speak? Why would God pick someone who has a speech impediment? Here's the answer. And hold on to your seats, because it's a humdinger. Why would God pick someone who has a speech impediment to go and speak to the most powerful leader in the land to free the enslaved. Why would God ask Moses, who obviously doesn't know how to talk well? Because it did not matter. I'm gonna explain that to you. It obviously did not matter to God. That the human standards by which we measure who is worthy to do the work of God does not matter to God. That the things that we say ought to be the reasons you can be called, or that God will pick you, or that God will choose you, the things that we come up with obviously do not matter to God. Oh, God hears Moses' objection, but immediately reminds Moses, who do you think gives you the ability to speak? Incorrectly, by the way. Who do you think does all this? Don't you worry about that, Moses, because I will be with you and I will tell you what to say. I will give you what to do. You just go. And what was Moses' response? God, no, please send someone else. Boy, I honestly, I get speechless every time I read this. Moses is crazy. God has just promised you that I would be with you. But I will be with you. I will give you what to say. And Moses said, please send someone else. Here's what I want you to understand that's going on here. And this is why it keeps shocking me. That even when God assures us that God is with us, even when God says, I will guide you, somehow we have been emphasis on his deficiency. What does God do? God gives Moses what Moses will need to do the work. So I'll let your brother go with you, because guess what, Moses? You're not getting off the hook. You're going to do what I called you to do. Troy Perry, you're not getting off the hook. You're going to do what I told you to do, because I called you to do it. It doesn't matter what you think about yourself. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks about you. I called you to do it. You're going to do it. And so you can't speak, all right. Aaron will speak for you. I bet Moses was kicking himself then, like, I thought I got out of this. Moses may have seen his speech impediment as a disqualifying failure, but God did not. Moses may have had a problem seeing his own gifts and his ability to do justice, but God did not. And here's another thing I want you to understand. Moses had a speech, but God didn't fix his speech. Oh, I know you've heard it. Before God can call you, you got to get right. Before God can call you, you got to change something about yourself. You know what they're talking about. Before God can use you, you can't be gay. You've heard it. You've heard it. Before God can do this, you gotta stop this. God didn't fix Moses. You see, God is not looking for perfect people. God is looking for people who will go. God is not looking for perfect people. So whatever Moses' defects, impediments, or inadequacies are, God still needs him. God still calls him. God still uses him. Oh, you're not shouting with me. Whatever was wrong, whatever was the matter with him, however weak he was, however bad he was, God still needed him. God still used him. God still called him. Oh, I know. Too many times, we've ignored God's call, or we've dismissed God's prompting because we are convinced that we are not good enough, that we are not gifted enough, or that we're not righteous enough. And I know I've heard it before. I am not called to do it because I'm gay. I'm not called because I used to steal. I'm not going to do it because I'm not smart. I'm not called to do anything because I didn't graduate. I'm not called to do it because I drink a little too much. I'm not called to do it because I yell all the time. I'm not called to do it because I curse all the time. No, it doesn't matter. When God needs you, God's going to call you, and you better go. Whatever the defects, impediments, or inadequacies, real or perceived, what I want us to understand is that God is trying to get our attention. God is trying to get our attention. God is trying to enlist us in the work of liberation. God is calling us to be instruments of deliverance. God is calling us to be agents of liberation. There is too much bondage. There is too much oppression. There's too much hate. God is calling us to do it. And we often focus too much on what's wrong with us that we simply can't see what is right with us. We're so concerned about what the impediments are, or what the inadequacies are, or real or perceived, that we can't focus on God, or how God is calling us to live fully as God's agents of change, or how God sees us as beloved co-creators of a beloved community. God does not have to correct what we consider to be personal or spiritual deficiencies to use us. Put simply, it doesn't matter to God what we think are our professional or personal or cultural failures and weaknesses are. God needs us. God calls us. God uses us anyway. And I understand too. I know you probably say, well, yeah, okay, I did hear God ask me to do it, but I'm scared. I doubt if I can make it. I doubt if I can do it. I doubt that they will listen to me. I doubt that I have what it takes. But God doesn't give up on us. God equips us with the very thing that we need to do the very thing that God called us to do. When it comes to the liberation of God's people and our calling to do something, God will call and push and prod. So you might as well just pay attention. God will push and prod. And see, that's why I can't fault Colin Kaepernick for taking a knee. That's why I can't blame those who resist the attempts to roll back health care and deport childhood arrivals. And that's why I applaud all of that nonviolent direct action in protest to injustice, because God is calling free people to free people. And who am I to say, oh, you didn't get the call? And that's why I tell all my evangelical friends, yes, I'm calling them out. Be careful, be careful, be careful who you say God can't use. Be careful who you say God isn't using. Oh no, because Moses tells us right here, we see it in Moses' experience, no matter who you are, no matter what's going on with you, no matter how imperfect you may be, if God needs you for God's work, God is coming to call. And we don't have to say no. We don't have to say no. So today, I want you to understand that God is determined to deliver and liberate creation from bondage and oppression. And God is calling each of us to play our part in that deliverance. No defects, no impediments, no inadequacies, real or perceived, will stop God from calling us to do the work of liberation. It won't happen. And just like Moses and Troy Perry or any of the other people who are getting out there into the fray, God is trying to get our attention, but God will also promise us. God promises us that God will be with us and equip us with what we need to do the work. Accept that call. Don't say no. Don't say no. Don't say no.